Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about the tip of the tooth. This is the most important part on the chainsaw tooth, just the actual tip. Less than a millimetre of the tooth is the most critical part. The rest of it is nowhere near as critical. So we'll talk about that. First of all, we'll just go over a few little stats there that typically a chainsaw spins at about 12,000 RPM, travels in excess of 100 kilometres an hour, which means it's doing over 1,000 metres a minute. On a 3/8 chain, there's a tooth or a cutter every 40 millimetres or inch and a half. So therefore, you sort of divide that up and you come up with the mathematics of 25,000 cuts per minute. It's actually quite a lot. But what's important about that is it's only a fraction of the tooth actually bites into the timber. And if we're to look at the tooth, on a brand new tooth, only 0.6 of a millimetre ever bites into the timber. Because from the factory, they're set at 0.65 of a millimetre in depth. This is a raker gauge tool. This is a raker gauge or a depth gauge. This is what we refer to the attack angle. From this point to this point, a good attack angle is around about 6. As the tooth comes down, it bites into the bit of timber. It has this little rocking motion, like rocks up and down. So as it strikes a bit of timber, goes to dig in, because the timber is going in that direction. So as it strikes a timber, it wants to stop, and the raker will hit the timber and will only allow it to take 0.65 of a millimetre of timber. So it's barely taken anything. So this edge on top and this 0.65 of a millimetre is doing all the work. This is a working corner. This is a full chisel chain. Only this part of the corner ever does any work, as well as this leading edge. All along here does very little work, a small percentage. It severs any fibres that aren't. And down the bottom here, this is what we refer to the gullet. Some guy on YouTube keeps on waffling on about get the gullet, but I don't know what that's all about. But this doesn't serve much purpose at all, and the side plate doesn't serve a lot of purpose at all. Once you get past this point here, it's, as I say, it's only going to sever a few timbers. Now, if we zoom in, and we've got Husqvarna's X-Cut, and you'll notice that it's only got a very little sharp point there. The rest of it has got a curve on it. So it's only that 0.65 of a millimetre. So you really want the length of that. If it goes in 0.65 of a millimetre, this is at the beginning of the life of the tooth. By the time the tooth wears down to there, on a progressive depth gauge, you'll be 1.2 millimetres in depth. So therefore, this little straight angle that you can see here doesn't need to be any longer than about 2 millimetres in length. And if we were to look at the next chain, we'll just take this chain out, which is Stihl's Hexa, you'll find out that it goes down the side plate. If you actually have a look there, it goes down the side plate about 70% at least. So, and then it's the other angle here is another 60 degrees. So you've got a span of 120 degrees. The gullet is flat, but as I said before, can't see it serves much purpose at all. Below, once you pass a millimetre, this angle here to me really doesn't serve a lot of purpose, whether it's got a C shape, whether it's slightly hexagonal or not, because it's only that 0.65 of a millimetre, or when the tooth wears down 1.2 millimetre, that's actually bites into the timber. The rest of the side plate does not bite into the timber, unless it's removing a bit of side fibres. And that's all it's ever going to do. It's this working corner, this very, very point that does all the work. So when we look at a tooth like this, it's this edge here that bites into the timber, and it only bites in a little bit like that. So this is the most important part, the top plate and just a little tiny bit on the side plate, hardly anything. The rest of this, as far as I'm concerned, can be any shape. And as far as a gullet, well, that don't serve any purpose. The only thing that may help is if chips are flying past there and it's fairly flat, it's probably more efficient at ejecting chips. But that said, if you're filing correctly or grinding correctly, you shouldn't have any issues with the gullet. One thing that you'll see on a new chain, you may even find at the bottom of the gullet, because it's done on a machine, you'll see this little ski jump here. I think this is what this guy refers to, maybe getting rid of the ski jump or something, but honestly, I can't see how that really affects anything. Look, all your different angles that you've got on chainsaw chain have a little bit of effect. I'll just bring this one back down. And what I mean by that is, on your full chisel, which looks like this, your top plate angle, which is this angle on here, on full chisel, 25 degrees is great. And this is referred to the top plate cutting angle, the angle the grinding wheel comes down or the angle that the file leaves. The reason that we're using top plate for both of these is because you've got a compounded beveled angle on here. So the front of the tooth has an angle going down and the top of the tooth has an angle as well. So top plate angle, top plate cutting angle. And when we look at a semi-chisel, it's got that nice rounded corner on it like that. So this working corner is much more forgiving and stays sharper a lot longer. So even on this tooth, the same sort of thing. Even though it's semi-chisel, it's rounded, it's only going to bite into the timber 0.65 of a millimetre at any given stage on a brand new tooth. Now the progressive depth gauge. We spoke about this depth gauge here, how this depth gauge will set the depth. So this depth gauge tool is what a lot of people use, and it is designed to maintain a gap of the tooth between the highest point on the tooth and the lowest point on the raker of 0.65 of a millimetre between this point and this point. And that's all it's ever going to do till you get to the end of the life. But on a progressive depth gauge, which is a totally different design like this, it's got two settings, hardwood, softwood. What it actually does is, as the tooth wears down, or starts to wear down from being brand new, it will set the depth at 0.65 of a millimetre, which is roughly what it is when it comes out at the factory. By the time you get down to the end of the life, the witness mark, using this type of gauge, you will remove up to 1.2 millimetres in depth. Now, I hear some people say, why is that? Why is it that it removes a lot more, almost double, than this type of gauge? Why is this gauge only removing 0.65 and it's been used since Joseph Burford Cox in Portland, Oregon, invented this in the 50s? And it wasn't until 1968 that Ray Carlton from Carlton Chains put a worldwide patent on the progressive depth gauge. So this is called a progressive depth gauge. This is called a constant depth gauge because it only constantly will ever maintain a depth of 0.65 of a millimetre. But when we look at a tooth, when we look at the tooth like that, we spoke before, this is the attack angle. Brand new, the distance from here to here is 0.65 of a millimetre. sorry, the distance in height is 0.65 of a millimetre between these 2 points. The distance between the tip of the tooth and the tip of the raker is about 6 millimetres on a 3/8 chain when it's brand new. But as we file this chain down, right down to here where the notch is, we tip that up. That's referred to the end of the life. At that distance from here to here is now about 12 millimetres in length. And by using the standard constant depth gauge like this one, the attack angle that I was talking about before, which is roughly around about 6 when it's brand new, will diminish down to about anywhere from 3.5 to 4. An attack angle of 3.5 to 4 is going to not cut your timber very good luck if it's 60%. But when using this type of gauge, you'll find out that your attack angle is kept constant from brand new to the end of the life, and your cutting efficiency will always be 100%. In actual fact, you'll find out the chain will cut better when it gets worn down, for the simple reason a tooth has a taper on it. So the curve on a 3/8 chain on a full chisel is 4.5 millimetres in width. By the time it gets down